I have the great pleasure of hosting Mr. Jack Barsky. So, Mr. Barsky, thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome, but this came in handy so I don't spend the whole Thanksgiving just working. And I like talking to people.
Excellent. Okay, so I would like to start with a question on how was your life like before the KGB?
Oh, it was under the circumstances. When I look back and be really honest about it, it was well above the average East German. It started out, even though by Western standards, I grew up in poverty, but by East German standards, not. It was more or less like a middle class situation. My parents were both teachers, and teachers were well treated by the Soviet occupation, as well as then by the rulers that the communist rulers that eventually took over in East Germany, because they wanted to make sure that the future generation gets properly indoctrinated. Okay, so I was never even close to homeless. The two houses I grew up in were actually not really freestanding houses. The first one had an apartment on the third floor, a big old brick school with only like three classrooms, but nevertheless it was a sturdy building. We had heat, we had running cold water, and the second one was attached to a smaller school building, but it still was. And this was in the country, where we could plant, you know, fruits and vegetables. We had an apple tree and a pear tree, and my dad had the first motorcycle. And first, I grew up in a village, and then I grew up in a suburb of a small town. And he was, to my knowledge, the first individual in the small town who had a car, because we had money. We had, I'm looking back, the furniture was pretty good. It was comfortable. Uh, the two things that weren't where I had to like join everybody else, and that was the availability of good food. I have a picture of myself when I was 12 years old. I was malnourished, thin as a rail. I was not allowed to play sports because my internal organs had not kept pace with my growth. I'm a pretty tall guy. And the other thing that's right next to it is the medical system. Uh, I grew up having to fight off every bug that invaded my body because there was no medication. Like, as a result, I have natural immunity. When COVID came along, everybody in my family got it really bad. I had asymptomatic COVID, since I came to the U.S., uh, I got the flu once, and I do not take flu shots, but it was painful. There was no numbing of when they invaded your body. Uh, I remember the personal doctor that I had in the small village. He was the only one. He hurt me badly 3 times. Once he went into the ear and pierced my eardrum because I think he had to drain the ear. Once he performed a small operation on the bottom of my foot without anesthesia. And a third one has to do with being a little boy. Okay. Moving the foreskin, that was painful also. So, but, and because I was a smart kid, I also pretty much joined the quote unquote intellectual elite. I did very well in middle school, advanced to high school. There, I was in a dorm, uh, with other students. That it was a uh, a building that was owned by, prior to the communists taking that away from the fellow, from somebody who was a small industrialist. So that was pretty good, and the education was very good, and then I was able to get to a go to a top university, studied chemistry, and because I worked hard, and I had a lot of talent. But I really worked hard, and I was an outstanding student. And so in my junior year, at the beginning of the junior year, I got a national scholarship that paid me, and this was one of those elite scholarships because there were about 20,000 students at my university, and the day I received mine, there were two others who got that. And the monetary award was the same amount of money that I was paid when I was employed as an assistant professor. All of a sudden, I was rich. I didn't even know what to do with all that money because you couldn't buy that many good things in East Germany. So I I had it good, comparatively speaking, compared to many others. And actually, uh, ironically, uh, a couple of first years, one in Germany and the other one in the United States, my living conditions were significantly worse than anything else I ever had experienced. And I can get into this if you care. So that's a long answer to a short question. So feel free to interrupt me.
Okay, sure. So, can you describe the events or aspects of your upbringing that made you an ideal candidate for recruitment?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of what made me a good candidate uh, has to do with genetics. You if you're genetically wired to be smart, all you have to do is use the smarts and work with it. Uh, Also, there were a number of other things like fearlessness. I don't know. I had a personality test. I took a personality test that's the only one that's out there in public that includes genetic material and genetics test, and it says, yeah, there's a lot in my wiring that made me a good candidate, but there was also something in upbringing. First of all, again, you can via the via epigenetics, your your genetic imprint, of how individual genes, how strong they are or how weak they might become, uh, that can be influenced by upbringing and by the environment. And for instance, fearlessness. I had to endure a lot of beatings by my father. So eventually, it's just like I know it's going to go past, and also the pain that the doctor inflicted on me. So you just grin and bear it, right? And I was and still am very adventurous. And one thing that was actually not based on genetics, one quote unquote strength was. The fact that I had not learned how to love and that I was not really, other than infatuation, really in love with somebody. My parents, listen, there were in my entire family, so we're talking extended family. So it's my parents, three sets of uncle and aunt, two sets of grandparents. I cannot remember once when one member turned to the other member, whether that was child or peer, or son or daughter, and said out loud, "I love you." So I did not receive the emotional, hug you, kiss you, love you, that kind of love as a child that every child desires and yearns for. It was tough love. It was discipline. You do, we do. I was given work as soon as I could do work around the house, and always, the focus on good grades because both parents were teachers. It wouldn't have looked good if I got bad grades. So you add this all together. Uh, when in hindsight, I was the perfect candidate.
I see. And how were you first approached by the KGB?
I never even thought in my wildest dreams that I was doing espionage work. That's not. I don't even know if maybe some people think about this. I know I was going to be a professor. I my parents were both teachers, and I already liked to teach when I could. Classmates like tutor them and stuff that they had problems with. So teaching and you know tenured professors in East Germany made a lot of money compared to everybody else. And they were sort of in a smaller town, in a university town, they were the elite group. And, that's very, very appealing. Combine something you like doing with getting standing and status. So, no, so when this fellow approached me, I was in my dorm room on a Saturday. It was a German, and he said he wanted to talk with me, possibly about a job after I graduate at the company called Carl Zeiss Jena, which is even in existence today. That was one of the best companies in all of East Germany. They made very high value optical instruments. So the moment he said that, and he said it right at the beginning, I knew that he was not from Carl Zeiss Jena, simply because in those days, recruitment was not a possibility. When you graduated, you would had two choices. If you were in the top 10%, you could stay on and get your doctorate, and then you would be assigned, unless you were good enough to stay and become, a sort of a professor or a lecturer. There were some levels. So when everybody else was assigned, and it doesn't matter whether they wanted to go to that place or not, there were some really really highly polluting factories and refineries in East Germany where the air was lousy and vegetation was not good, not nice places. No, you were assigned. So the moment he said, could you imagine to work for Carl Zeiss Jena one day? And he didn't ask the question at the time. Okay, he just said that he's from Carl Zeiss Jena, and then we did a lot of small talk back and forth. I don't know why he did that. He was not very capable. I don't know if I'm in charge of that section of the KGB in that town. I would fire the guy who hired this man. He was the most incapable KGB collaborator or KGB agent I ever worked with. So and then, but he was successful because I played my cards in a way that helped him. So sometime after like 15, 20 minutes, he changed his tune. He said, I got to be honest with you. I'm really not from Carl Zeiss Jena. And I didn't make a gesture. I didn't grin. I just uh, was very unresponsive. And then he said, I'm from the government. Could you imagine to work one day for the government? And I said, yeah, but not as a chemist. Because my understanding was I had nothing to fear from the Stasi, East German Secret Police. I was in good standing. Uh, I I had gotten the scholarship. I was a party member. I had violated none of the rules except maybe one, but I'm not going to talk about it right now.
I see.
So I had nothing to fear. So I pretty much expected this to be recruitment for espionage. And that was somewhat interesting. Again, curiosity. Let's see what happens. He wasn't asking me, would you like to join next week? At that point, I would have said, no, I don't know. But there were. I just played along, and the bottom line is, he got an answer to the question that he didn't ask. You know, we operated what I call between the lines. Um, it was not explicit. Then he said, "Okay, let's continue the conversation," and he invited me to the number one, the most expensive restaurant in town. And when I got there, uh, I saw him sitting at a table, and there was another man at the table. And it was in those days was not unusual for strangers to share a table because there weren't enough tables. So I was wondering, should I actually say hello to the guy because now I'm in the world of secrecy. But he got up, he walked towards me, took me to the table, and then he said, I would like to introduce our comrade Herman. We are working with our Soviet comrades. And then he said, so I got to go. He never introduced himself by any name, whether it was a cover name or a real name. He just disappeared. So, and Herman, of course, that wasn't his real name. So one time, as a sidebar, one time I got him mad when I asked him, is your, because I was naive, is your real name German, which is Russian for German?
Germany, yeah.
Herman was a cover name, and he didn't tell me that either. But they kept a lot of stuff from me. I don't know why they were so secretive, but so, and it was now the task up to Herman to figure out whether I should be recruited. This was just work collaborating, meeting once every other week. And initially, I met in his car. Then we met in a secret sort of a conspiratorial flat where he gave me some Western news magazines to read and stuff like that. And we talked a little bit about what it would be like to be an agent and an agent who works by himself. Okay. We didn't go into a whole lot more, but that raised in me the vision of we had an East German version of W07. What's his name again? Yeah, of who?
James Bond.
Yeah, yeah. Um, James Bond, and he did the right thing. He was in West Germany and he hunted down Nazis, but he also drove the fast cars. He had pretty girls, and he lived in a nice mansion, and yet he did good work. I mean that was interesting. But what wasn't so interesting was when Herman gave me little tasks. You know, like for instance. Um, he gave me an address and he said there's a couple living there that have somebody of interest to us who lives in West Germany, and we want to find out if and when he will come to visit so we can recruit him. So yeah, well, you can't just go there and say, can you tell me a little bit about your relative? This was now done in secret. So I hated that task, um, because I still in those days was, even though I was gregarious amongst people that I knew well, but with strangers, I was always like shy with strangers. So now I had to talk to a stranger, lie to them, and find a way to get that secret out of them. And so, but the one thing that I've always been very creative, particularly with words. I can't draw. I can't draw something that looks like what I want to draw, and I can't dance. I can sing sort of pretty well, but I can write and speak quite well. And so I came up with a cover story. I told the lady who came out after I rang the doorbell. I said, um, I'm a sociology student, and I'm doing a survey. And I had written down a survey, a bunch of questions, and the questions came closer and closer to the subject as to, what we think about West Germany and the standard of living, and does she know that there's this? Because I didn't know that, I had no relatives in the West. So she then volunteered. Oh yeah, we have Heine. He's a cousin of mine. He lives in, and he's, oh, interesting. So is he sending these special gifts that other people are getting? Yeah, yeah. We get coffee and cocoa and chocolate and all that stuff. Oh, by the way, he's going to come to visit. Oh, that's great. Maybe I could meet him. I don't know. Up to you. She said, yeah, yeah. Well, stop by, and she gave me the date as well. Now that when I told Herman how I went about it, that impressed him, because that's something that is in some agents' repertoire. They once even had me do this in Berlin. and go to the West and talk to older people that lived in an apartment about something I forgot. Uh, that was one of the final tests before they actually made the offer. And there was another test that I remember that they asked me to find out. Herman asked me to find out. He pointed out an office building, so mid-sized office building, three stories maybe. And he asked me find out what the people in there doing, but there was no sign or anything. So there was a bus stop right next to it, and it was covered, so people would be protected from the rain. So I left my briefcase there. And the next day, I knocked on the door, rang the bell, whatever, and whoever came out, I asked him, um, "Did anybody by any chance pick up a briefcase here and left?" He said, "Yeah, come on in." So now what I used, which I really didn't have, I used a natural likability. I just had a talent to make people like me pretty quickly. So I got into small talk and what you're doing here, so that really made a good impression. And the fact that I was honest with Herman, I, I, I treated him like I would have treated my father had he not left the family. I shared everything with it, even when I made a mistake and I didn't have to tell anybody because I was the only one who made that mistake. So there was a lot of what, the observations that he made were all positive, and I think what really clinched the whole thing was, other than he knew that I was really smart and all that, but what clinched it was that I had no problem stepping into the unknown because it during vacation after my junior year, my best friend and I hitchhiked from East Germany all the way to the Black Sea in Bulgaria. Very few East Germans did that those days. There weren't enough cars, and hitchhiking was not popular. Most cars wouldn't stop, and we had to go through one, two, three, four countries where we didn't speak the language and didn't know where we would sleep any given night, and we had limited allotment of money for each country, and we had to be in and out in a couple of days. I came back undamaged with a full beard because we slept outside several times. And when I shared that with Herman, I think if he sent reports every time we talked, he sent it out with a big plus. And if he sent it out as a package, he clearly pointed that out because I I didn't know that, but I was meant to go initially to West Germany as a single person. That wasn't very explicit. It was more like it was hinted at, and so that means I would have to start a new life altogether, which is more challenging than hitchhiking. But I would have to step into the unknown, something you can't practice. I couldn't have practiced the hitchhiking. There's always the first time you got to do it, and you got to do it, and the danger involved in doing something like that uh, doesn't go away just because you practice. Okay, so 18 months it took until Herman sent me to Berlin for some more training. Well, I got a little training, but really I was there to be recruited. And so on my very last day, I was introduced to who I very much believe was the head of the KGB in East Germany. And he very quickly, after some small talk, he just was really brutal. He said, "So, can we count on you or not?" I was not prepared for that question. I was still playing around. I had this great career ahead of me and my family that didn't quite exist anymore, but I played basketball on the college team, and that was my family. I loved these guys. We had a lot of stuff together, and we traveled together, and we had a lot of fun, and we were a pretty good team. So I had not seriously thought about that question and the answer I might give. So I told him, I don't know if I qualify, and I'm not trained either, so I can't give you an answer. The guy looked at me and he said, and really like he was a short guy, but with a phenomenal psychological strength. The moment he opened his mouth, it didn't sound small; it was steely. And with that steely voice, he he said, "Don't worry about it. We know that you're qualified, and we will train you. However," he said, we work with people that can make decisions real quick because if you can't make that decision without thinking much, you don't qualify. So this is my last test. You have until tomorrow noon to say yes or no. I don't even know if he said yes or no, but in hindsight, I knew that I pretty much knew that if I had said no, they would have let me go because I was still employed by the university. I was on leave for it was an official leave for like talk to the State Department or something like that. Somebody in the government. So yeah, imagine that made for an interesting sleepless night. I went like this and that and this and that. And on the way back to the place, the house where I stayed there for the 2 weeks, uh, I had to go pass through a park and I started talking to the trees.
Oh, really?
I didn't believe in any God or higher being at the time. So it wasn't like I just like needed to talk to something or somebody. Now, what about this? And you know how when you're alone for a long time, you start talking to yourself. I just looked at the trees, and I still remember that there were tall trees on both sides of the path. And I had come to no logical conclusion other than when I gave the answer to my handler, the guy who I worked with in Berlin. It was yes, and it was a gut instinct feeling that nowadays I understand was driven by a couple of things. First of all, and that was not, it was very important to have. I was convinced that I would be serving a good cause. You don't take unless you have a criminal mind. You don't take the risk that comes with that that kind of an engagement unless you have something that says I'm doing this because I'm helping people. I'm doing this for the good of mankind. So that was the foundation. But then you add to this the flattery that the KGB was recruiting me. My God, because I knew the KGB was the most powerful intelligence agency on the planet. Uh, and how can you not be flattered? They want me. And thirdly, obviously, the adventure and the James Bond picture. You put this all together, and all of a sudden, it became a no-brainer, even though it wasn't logical at the time. For instance, the flattery that never occurred to me. That's in hindsight, right? Because I was really what we call nowadays. I was full of myself because I was so damn good. I was the the uh, the way people treated me at the university and also the high level party officials was nothing but flattery. And I give you this one extreme example. I fathered a child out of wedlock, and the East German Communist Party had high morals. You were not supposed to cheat on your wife, and you were not to have a child out of wedlock. And if you did, you received a severe reprimand. Nobody ever wanted to even talk to me about that, as if it didn't happen. And it was well known because the mother was a fellow student in the section chemistry, and she eventually wound up walking around with a baby, and she told people who the dad was. So I was totally full of myself. I was untouchable. So yeah, and so that's how. So long. You didn't interrupt, but that made a kind of sense because I was able to tell you how it all hangs together.
Was there anything you believed you knew about espionage that turned out to be different in practice?
Yeah, all that James Bond stuff. That's I quote unquote knew that. It could have happened, but it didn't. Um, and I actually, because when I was recruited, I was going to West Germany, and I knew as somebody, however they smuggled people into West Germany out of the East, they were welcome in open arms. And East Germany, the Stasi had uh, about 1,000 people of theirs in the West German government at very high level. Are you familiar with Günter Guillaume?
Yes,
He was advisor to Chancellor Willy Brandt,
right.
and he was Stasi, and there were others. The head of the Bundesnachrichtendienst at one point, or senior official, maybe not the head, and also a lady very high up. They work for the Stasi. So I knew I expected the good life, and I expected to like discover a lot of secrets. Well, guess what? These hands have never touched a document in the United States that had secret or top secret written on it. What they didn't tell me uh, after we changed, that when it turned out that I'm very good at acquiring another language with just a minor accent. So when they figured out that they could actually smuggle me into the United States as a born American,
So, how did you prepare for your role in the United States?
I just want to finish answering the other question. What they didn't tell me that the illegals in the United States were insurance policies, just in case, because all the other agents in the U.S., the Russian agents, were diplomats, just in case diplomatic relations would be broken up, and the most successful spies for the KGB towards the end of the Cold War were moles in the FBI and the CIA. And if there's no more, they interacted with the diplomats. If there are no more diplomats, who can take that material and hand it over uh, seamlessly to get it somehow into Russian hands? You know, that they never told me, but that was my primary task: live like an American. Okay. So now get back to your question. I'm sorry.
My question was how did you prepare for your role in the United States?
That the training was all, first of all one-on-one, unless I was giving instructions into certain elements of espionage, which are called tradecraft. Then I had a translator uh, because the technicians typically didn't speak German or English for that matter. So tradecraft, uh, I that training was very good, and I can tell you what it consisted of: uh, shortwave radio reception, Morse code, decryption, encryption, secret writing, very important, surveillance detection, dead drop operations, meeting protocols, and all of this. The training that I got for tradecraft in Moscow was outstanding. Everything else was either self studies or it was really bad or non existent. So, self studies, for instance, they told me, learn another language, pick one. So, I picked English. And then, okay, so I hired myself a tutor and started working with this fellow. And then, as I got a little better, I hired another one and so forth. But in the meantime, I also spent every day reading English literature in a library and wrote down every single word that was new to me. And I kept track of it. I I processed and I had a method to prove this to myself. I processed and learned 100 new words every uh, week.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot, and I had a system with index cards and and also a way to promote promote. I had 5 levels. So level one is you just wrote it down. Level two, if you remember what it means uh, the first time you go through. So it gets to level two, and from level two it can go to level three, four, and five. When I was at five, I knew that I knew it. But if I missed one, even at level five, it would go back down to level four until it successfully make it through five. I had a similar system in college that was shared with me by a fellow student. It's a great system. So one day I had a visitor from Moscow, and he asked how my English progressed, and I showed him a English novel, and said I can read this now without a dictionary. That's when the light bulbs went on. And so when first I was tested in Moscow by a couple of ladies to to determine whether I was a good candidate to learn English well enough, and particularly pronounce it well enough. And since even at that time, uh, I was significantly better than the average German as far as pronouncing English reasonably well. It was more like the British English. So that I spent 2 years in Moscow doing English, interacting with a tutor uh, twice a week, and we always talked. It was just conversation because of the vocabulary. I knew all of that, and I did phonetics exercises in the evening. Listen to a tape, a word spoken, repeat it, listen, repeat, and then I had the opportunity to also spoke with to 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 interact with a famous espionage couple, Lana and Morris Cohen, who who were members of the Rosenberg spy ring, didn't go to jail in the U.S. They were able to get out before they were arrested, and then they spent some time in jail in England after they were redeployed, and then when they retired, when they were in jail, and when they were exchanged for somebody else, they were able to spend the rest of their days in Moscow in a very nice apartment, and that helped because they both had been active in espionage. That helped me to gain more confidence. They shared the successes and the failures. It also helped me to understand that the KGB was serious when they told me that if I wind up in jail, they get me out because they got them out. And lastly, uh, Morris spoke like a man, so I could listen to how American men talk, even though this guy had a pretty thick New York accent. uh, so, based on my backstory, I shouldn't have had a New York accent because I spent a lot of time. Yeah, I said no, I could have. I was supposed to have gone to school in New York, but then I moved to upstate New York and spent where they don't have the same accent. The New York City accent is unique.
What were the challenges of adapting to American culture, and how did you handle those challenges?
Yeah, no, you're asking really good questions because that is where I got absolutely no training whatsoever, none. Not even, the psychology of people that you be working with, that you may want to recruit, or that kind of stuff. Nothing. I had never I wasn't never tested psychologically, so that was not in existence. And the other thing, as far as living like an American, pretending to have been born in New Jersey and had lived all your life in the United States, I was completely unprepared. And the problem there was, and they were not aware of that problem. Is the only people that I worked with were people who had operated in the U.S. under diplomatic cover. So they didn't know what it was like to live like an American. They interacted with Americans, but it's like I give that example. In Atlanta, Georgia, we have a real nice big aquarium, and you stand there and you watch the fish, and you can watch them as much as you have time, but you never find out what it's like to be a fish. I was going to be a fish, you know, like what it's like to uh, have a job in an American company, what it's like to interview for a job, uh, and all these things that come with being an American. What it is it like? What it is like to be a Yankee fan? Okay, they could tell me this stuff, and and also there's one thing what they did what they the tutor told me about, and that wasn't even the case anymore, that Americans, uh, when they have fork and knife, they first cut the meat and then they put the knife away and eat with a fork only. Not anymore.
Right.
That was dated stuff. But what I found out, what could have tripped me up, is counting on fingers. How do you count on fingers? Like do one, one, two, three with your hand. Now I'm asking you, do it.
One, two, three, four, five.
See, you start with a thumb, right?
Yeah, one, two, three. Yeah.
Americans start with the index finger,
Ah, really?
and for me, it's really awkward. I just found it out not too long ago. I always do. Like, I don't do this. I do this one, two, three, four. Europeans do with the thumb first. That makes more sense, right? This is you don't start in the middle. So I was ill prepared, but I was. See, the reason that I think they did a good job hiring me, they had confidence that I knew how to do things. I know how to what to do and what not to do, and I was pretty quickly well aware that could not pass for an American until I had learned a lot, and that would also include when we're talking about culture. You know, the members of the Yankee team for a young man. We had to know this in New York, right? Uh, the favorite TV shows that people are watching, and on and on and on. So I did watch a lot of television, and I watched American football and baseball. See, none of that was available to me in Moscow. The only thing that they gave me once was a movie that was pretty old, and the English spoken in that movie was stage English, which is closer to the UK type English. So no, there was nothing there, and literally it took me a good 6 years to be comfortable in my claim to have been born in New York and lived in New Jersey, and I'm a full-fledged American. It wasn't 100%, but in New York, because there's so many exceptions to the rule, there's so many odd people. Like even my accent, nobody worried about that. Very few people worried about that because I still have a touch of an accent that I hear when I hear myself recorded. But in New York, there was no problem. So 6 years. So it was the majority of my time before I could actually try to do something more useful, which I thought was supposed to do. Well, again, I told you what the number one reason for us being there was. It was us being there.
What was it like balancing your two identities? So basically, Jack Barsky and Albrecht Dittrich.
Artificially created dual personality. Um, it started out. Let me just. It started out when I when it was clear that actually instinctively, I don't know. I got to be really sure here about this. But when I knew perfectly well that I was going to impersonate an American, I did not ever connect German words to English words, and even now I have a hard time translating. It's it's in different. The two languages are stored in different sections of the brain that are not very well connected. So and I convinced myself when I was in the U.S. I was Jack Barsky, and you know, over time when everybody calls you Jack and you absorb the culture, you become that individual. So it is possible to do that. I'm the best example because I'm now more Jack Barsky than Albrecht Dittrich. Uh, but I had not yet shed the German. When I every 2 years I was back in Moscow, and then also spent a couple of weeks with my German family. I had a wife and a son there, and when people saw me that knew me and uh, called me by my German name Albrecht, I would turn around instinctively. But it was clearly. I wish somebody could have tested my brain at that time, but it was clearly I had two personalities, and I also acted differently in terms of as I became more and more Americanized. My communication style was different.
Was it hard to cope mentally with living basically two entirely separate lives?
No problem. That's a surprise. I get this question a lot. Absolutely none. I had a job to do, uh, and I did what I had to do. There was no burden on me. What it did do, though, when I finally went into civilian life, I didn't quite know who I was because, I had suppressed a lot of German abilities, German-based talents. I just, it, I got to know myself after many years of having stopped doing intelligence work very slowly, and it took. I mean, literally, I can tell you, I know who I am, and I got to know who I am maybe 3 years ago, roughly. And that is damaging, and that it makes you uncertain, and it doesn't allow you to use all your talents, all your gifts that you have to their fullest. I'm there yet, and I have to be had to reach my an age that starts with a seven.
Yeah. And basically, what was your main mission while living in the United States?
Well, this is what I was told, uh, and I was told initially that I was supposed to uh, focus on foreign policy, get to know decision makers in the U.S. government, and get to know influencers outside of the government, lobbyists, think tanks, and so forth, and find out what their plans are. This was it was feasible, but because I was not allowed, I failed. I acquired original documentation that allowed me to live and work as an American, the driver's license and social security card, but I couldn't get a passport. And that was the plan A. With a passport, I was going to move to Switzerland or Austria, open up a company, and then the KGB had real good experience moving money into a company. And a couple of years later, I come back to the United States, reasonably wealthy, and then I would be at a situation in society where I can get to know people of that caliber, because uh, you know you can't be a bike messenger, a college student, or even a computer programmer to to do that because you have no apparent reason. And it would have been really unusual for somebody with that background to have an interest in foreign policy, right? So so that it failed. So it became then, they told me, get to know as many people as possible, and find out if they are good targets for recruitment. So that's called a spotter in the intelligence field. I did a lot of that. I mean, not a lot, but I don't I haven't kept count. But I reported on a number of fellow students who were very smart and most likely were going for a government career. I don't know what they did with this, whether they tried to recruit any of those. And I reported on a couple of other people that may have been of interest, but that was it. Another thing that they gave me to do, and that never stopped. They told every agent who is operates in enemy territory, everyone needs to get assigned a military object to go and watch it for a while, not take pictures or anything like that. Just see if there's signs that they're preparing for war. So I had a little training for that to recognize what kind of ships you see at a distance based on their silhouette. Um, and then one time the 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 last 2 years I was also tasked to see if I can steal some technology that they couldn't buy on the open market. It was on the no export list. Hardware I couldn't because I hadn't had no access to that kind of hardware. But I did steal a piece of software which what was and still is quite valuable in the United States. But I don't think it was useful in the Soviet Union because it is being used to manage companies in a capitalist system, not in a planned economy. So that was it. There was nothing else. It sounded like no big deal.
How successful were you in achieving your goals, and how did you measure your success back in the day?
Okay, I'm gonna give you somewhat another long answer because I have to.
Sure.
The reason that I know that they considered me successful is this thing here. This is the Order of the Red Banner.
Wow.
That was the second highest decoration of the Soviet Union. And in other words, this was not a cheap medal from the KGB. They had to actually send somebody, a high-level KGB, and to the. There was this order was handed out by the highest level of the government, so they had to say, "Well, we got this guy. He's entrenched in the United States. He's our insurance policy. He was really good." Okay, so I got this, and so that gives me an idea that they considered me highly successful. Okay, in my own mind, I thought I was a failure because they even when I did something good, or when they may have recruited somebody, or they were happy with. Oh, one other thing, I also had to report uh, on what America's thinking about international things that happen in the in the world, like how Americans thought about when the Korean airliner was shot down and stuff like that. But I was never once told specifically about anything I did, and I sent them, "Good job." Nah, nothing. Uh, and I thought I was an absolute failure. Even getting that declaration of the Soviet Union, um, I I felt I had failed because uh, I could not get my hands on secrets. One other thing where I think they failed miserably, I could have extracted a lot of very valuable information from the computer system of my company. I work for an insurance company, and I was in the group health insurance department, and there were records of several thousand employees, all the way up to the highest level of employees that operate in the military-industrial complex. Oh my God, how important, how great a treasure trove that would have been to use as leverage for recruiting. If you find out that somebody is in therapy for drug use, or somebody has a relative who's very sick and the insurance isn't paying for it, that kind of. I told them that, and these idiots, thank God, didn't bite. They didn't have a clue that this was extremely valuable information. Well, I got lucky. I'm glad they didn't bite.
Can you please share a moment when you were closest to being discovered by the US?
The moment that I was closest, I wasn't aware of it until 9 years later. But that was the moment when Vasily Mitrokin, who was an archivist in the in the archives of the first directorate, espionage for the KGB, who had turned against the Soviet Union and smuggled out a lot of information out of the archives, which eventually he buried in his dacha. And when the Soviet Union fell apart, he handed that over to MI6, British intelligence. That was the moment. I was not aware of it at all, but was the very moment when it started. The discovery process started. Uh, the MI6 shared the information with the FBI. They ran a scan of, at that time, it was already possible, electronic records, and they found out there's a Jack Barsky. There was only my name in the records, my name, and that I was somewhere illegal in the Northeast. Well, when they found a Jack Barsky who applied for Social Security late in life, so they had their man. Now I still had no clue that they had their man. It took them 2 years to actually say hello.
How did your perspective on the United States change over time?
Well, it was thank God, a gradual change. Uh, Initially, I came to the U.S. with a significant prejudice uh, in that the country was evil, and the working people were paid not enough money. They weren't taken care of, and yeah, and the Americans I thought were like ugly, and where that came from. Every time in Moscow, there were a lot of American tourists, and they misbehaved really badly, and they were dressed like ugly, and they were just like running around like kings and queens. So, well, the first thing I noticed, Americans really weren't ugly. There were some ugly ones, and there were some really nice ones. Second thing is when my first job was as bike messenger, so that I knew I was paid very well, but I knew I was paid well because they had no choice. They wanted somebody to deliver packages real quick in Manhattan. You got to hire yourself who is not afraid to ride a bicycle uh, in New York, and so I knew I was I was special that way. But then I got a job as a computer programmer, and I was paid well, and then I got free lunch, and my bosses were nice. It felt almost like I was back in East Germany. Like, everybody was nice, and I felt like coming home. And then I got a raise and another raise, and it's like, okay, capitalism is not as evil as we were taught. And the other thing that I figured out, people worked hard and were much more productive than the people in East Germany, because I had had some exposure to how people worked or maybe not worked, because you were pretty much paid the same wage. There were very few individual incentives to work harder or better. If there were incentives, they were given to an entire team and then shared with everybody. So I found out that the evil capitalism was just not true. Of course, there's some evil capitalists, but generally, there's a lot of good employers, even today.
Did you start to see some kind of flaws in the Soviet narrative as you lived in the West?
No, I didn't see the flaws in the East simply because I was insulated. Okay, when I was back in Moscow, I, I was well treated. I was in an apartment. I was driven around when necessary. And when I was in Berlin, my family was very well treated. My wife was able to buy the most expensive car without waiting for it for 10 years. She had a telephone. Private telephones were highly unusual. And we were also given 2 weeks for recreation at very, very special private places, with a sauna and a pool and by the beach. So I was so insulated. All I knew from a distance was that East German athletes were still killing it. So and I thought everything was going fine until I got the big surprise when the wall came down 1 year after I had resigned from the KGB. Wall came down in 1989, and I said, what happened here? This is my country. Now the West Germans are going to take over. So I started doing research on the internet, and it didn't take very long to figure out that the belief that I had in me when I came to the U.S. was completely wrong. It was just like Marxism, Leninism was a big old lie, uh, and that I fundamentally had been subject to massive brainwashing. And it took a while for me to let go of everything. The key moment was when I was able to get a hold of translated writings by Vladimir Lenin, because Vladimir Lenin was our Jesus Christ, because he was the one who was going to implement the Marxist theory and practice, and he lost his health and eventually his life doing so. We read Lenin; that was a must in East Germany, and yes, he was a good guy. And then there was this mausoleum where the people were lining up and always staring at the dead Lenin. He was just like a communist Jesus. And so then I got a hold of the unredacted works of Lenin, and Jesus Christ became the devil. There are some passages in there where he instructs people in writing that in order to um, accelerate collectivization of agriculture, we need to take the land away from the kulaks, the big farmers. There were rich kulaks in Russia, and they were still in existence. We need to take that away from them, and if they fight, we're just going to hang them by this on trees that are on the side of the street, so everybody knows what happens if you resist us. My Jesus Christ disappeared very quickly, and then I just dropped out of the fight of ideologies. I wanted to be neutral. I just wanted to not think about this anymore, um, because I had a family, and I was focused on becoming a private citizen and living the American dream. That was rudely interrupted 9/11.
And how did you reconcile the work you did with your personal relationships?
Yeah, obviously, if I hurt anybody with my decision to become an agent and serve 10 plus years, 10 years for the KGB, and then not go back and reconnect with my German family, um, that's not reconcilable. My mother spent uh, the last days of up until the very last day, she was always looking for me because I lied to her and told her that I was working at a super secret uh, research facility in Kazakhstan, and she believed this to her last day. And I disappeared from from my wife and my son by producing another lie. When I decided to stay in the U.S., I told the KGB that uh, I I cannot return to Russia or Germany because of an AIDS infection, which they bought, which they believed 100%, and they told my German family, my wife, and particularly, that I died from AIDS, and so I can't make that good. I did a lot of damage to my mother, and I also did a lot of damage to Gerlinde, the name of my German wife. who never got remarried, even though she was told that I died. Uh, the reconciliation with my children was a different story. It actually did happen. And that's when my daughter Chelsea, when she found out that she has two half brothers in Germany, she started looking for them and eventually found them. And they came to visit. And we built a pretty good relationship. They forgave me. Uh, if it would have been totally unforgivable if I had done it for personal gain and money. But they understand, and so do a lot of friends of mine who worked on the other side, CIA, FBI. They understand that I was actually primarily working for a cause. I wasn't getting paid that much money. They, I had to eventually. The good life started after I uh, quit the KGB.
What was the most difficult part of integrating into the American society after you stopped spying?
After I stopped spying, that wasn't so difficult anymore. I focused on my career. I was a good programmer, and then I was pushed up into management. I was a good manager. I became even an executive. I mean, I was I, I was a highly functional upper middle class American. So that difficulty had disappeared. Well, difficulty came back after I became a public figure via the 60 Minutes interview, and I got let go from my last job. And now I had to learn how to be an entrepreneur and take care of myself. Now, I didn't have that. I couldn't have learned this under communism. It was really rough for me, to take care of your own marketing, your own everything, instead of just going to a company where you have a well-defined role and you have a steady income. I'm still struggling a little bit. It's getting better now, but so who would have thunk? Who would have thought it would go like that?
Yeah, and how did you build trust with the FBI and the U.S. government after you switched sides?
Well, two things. The first time they interacted with me after they introduced themselves. I told them right up front, and it was very credible. I said, I know that the only way then that my family and I can get out of this with the least amount of damage is if I fully cooperate. And I said I have every intention to do so, and that was credible because they knew that by observing me from a distance, that I loved my children. So and then I just told him everything I knew, and I come across like a very honest person. I just reviewed a video of where the lead agent of my case, the lead agent in my case, who became a good friend, told the interviewer that he knew I was very, very honest. That's number one. But that wasn't enough. I also had to pass a lie detector test. So that was an absolute must. Okay. Once I passed that test, eventually they told me, okay, we're going to let you stay in the U.S. You've been very valuable to us. We're going to legalize you. It's going to take time, but no damage done. So that's how that worked.
So, how did your views on loyalty, mortality, identity, life change after your time as a spy?
Well, I hinted at this already. When 9/11 happened, I became emotionally an American. Uh, I was not yet legal, but now I'm a legal American. But now I'm also intellectually an American. And if you would have to pay me a lot of money, and I probably would still not want to move to Germany. Uh, I have Americanized so much, and when I say intellectually an American, that has to do with I finally took a, a remote course on the American Constitution, and I had already come to the conclusion that you know communism, socialism if it didn't start evil, it would wind up in evil. In the history of man, there have been 27 attempts to build a communist socialist enterprise, and they all turned into dictatorships. So, and the Constitution is such a brilliant document that because it recognizes that that tendency, you must not have too much power concentrated into one institution, one big hierarchy, or one ruler, one party. It always winds up badly, particularly in a situation where there's a violent nature to man, and eventually, if you want to stay in power, you also have to use violence. So that's when I said, I'm a I'm a firm believer in the Constitution because it's so tempting. Who is not vulnerable to a little corruption? Who is not? I give you one example where I would have to think really hard, even though I think of myself as incorruptible, but it's not true. Let's say, let's say, following example. Let's say I am now working closely with the FBI on some case, and my youngest daughter is incredibly ill, and there's no healing for her. Except in France, there's a specialist who has proven that he can heal that illness, but it's going to cost $1 million that I don't have. Now I am in a moral dilemma. So man is corruptible. Period. And, there's the corruption that maybe can be explained and understood, but then there's also the one if you're out for yourself and you want to just get more money in a private jet and all that, that is raw evil. But it's part of the human condition that we're not we're also taking care of others, not just ourselves, and that's when you can be very vulnerable.
And do you think your experience has any lessons for modern world of cybersecurity and intelligence?
It's still valid, and anybody who knows anything about intelligence will tell you that human intelligence, or abbreviated HUMINT, is still king, because ultimately we are not in a situation. There's a lot of stuff you can do with technology. There's a lot of things you can find out. There's a lot of things you can do to even manipulate people, but it's still people that make decisions nowadays, no matter whether they ask AI what to do or not. Ultimately, decisions, as long as decisions are made by individuals, uh, you want to know what's going on in the mind of Vladimir Putin right now, or what Trump is thinking if you're Vladimir Putin. So that is still valid. Also, some aspects of tradecraft, particularly dead drops, for instance. You know, in espionage, cash is king, right? You don't want to be traceable. So if you want to give somebody money, you can't use Venmo. Okay, you need to hand them cash, and they have to launder it in some way. You don't give it to them. You put it in a container and drop it someplace so he can pick it up. So there's still some valid tradecraft. Uh, Surveillance detection is getting tougher and tougher to do the way I used to do it, for one reason. The CIA now knows that they have the ability to change face, and rather quickly. Uh, I met the lady who worked with her husband, who's still alive. Jonah Mendez is her name, and she gave a presentation and she showed two pictures of herself, and then right next to it a picture of a young black man, and that was her too. And it took only minutes to change that picture, because my strength in surveillance detection was to I had really good memory of faces. And when I saw a second face twice in 3 hours walking around in the city, I knew I was being followed. The other thing that uh, makes it tougher to shed surveillance is AI can go through a massive amount of camera footage that people couldn't do, but AI uh, could find suspicious behaviors. Um, Having said that, a lot of these private cameras are uh, also private, and the government can't just take them over. So, but the whole picture for with regard to surveillance detection, it was in my days it was stacked in favor of me. Now you're like not really sure. You don't know what you don't know. So,
If you could speak to a younger yourself, what advice would you give him?
okay, if the motivation is based on strong patriotism, I just tell him to be prepared that one day your government may ask you something that goes against your own moral principles. If you can handle that, then go for it. But if you think this is going to be a lot of fun and an adventure, don't even think about doing it.
What inspired you to share your story publicly?
Well, it's interesting. Initially, my kids tried to inspire me to write my book when I told them they were already adults, and they was what you got to write a book. And I reached out to some literary agents in the field of true crime, 20 of them with email, where maybe shared a paragraph or maybe one page of information about my life. And I asked them if they would be interested in representing me. I was told I had to use agents because publishers don't want to take anything from private individuals. They want to screen stuff. And I got one answer of the 20 emails and that was an agent who told me, well, I can write your story for $20,000. So I was convinced that my story, for me, it was normal what I did. So I was convinced nobody had any interest in it. So I was not inspired. Period. What happened then was people call it serendipity, but I think it was God's design. Uh, there were, without me uh, being aware of it, there were a number of people interacting with one another, step by step by step by step, that eventually my then wife's half brother, who came to visit somebody else in the United States, and accidentally that somebody else lived very close where we lived. And so he came to visit, and he knew that I had a German background. And he asked one day, we stayed with us for a while, uh, how I made it to the US. And I said I had some help from the government. And he said, which government, the German or the American? I said, no, the Russian. And he went, huh? And then so he wrote down the basics of my story. Make a long story short, through a number of connections, he actually got that story to a the number one female reporter for or journalist for Der Spiegel. And when I eventually got my citizenship and my passport, and I went back to Germany. I when I stepped out of the plane into the arrival hall and got to the arrival hall at the airport, I saw Richard, that's the guy's name, in the background, just leaning against the wall, and I had a microphone and a camera in my face. So that was my inspiration. Now, what happened then? Um, this lady actually got in touch with Steve Croft, the then number one journalist for working for 60 Minutes, and told him what she discovered, who she discovered. And so when I came back from Germany, the producer of 60 Minutes called me, and I discussed it with my wife, and we decided it's kind of hard to say no to 60 Minutes. That was the number one premier news magazine in the world. So, and that's how I got interviewed and became a public figure, and that's how I got let go from my last job, and that's how I am now talking to you. If these if these things hadn't happened all in a row, and there's too many of those to talk about them. There's a lot that had to happen without my knowledge. I wouldn't be talking to you today.
And the final question, so what are you passionate about today? How do you find purpose now that your life is no longer filled with secrets?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a good one because with without that purpose, uh, I I think I would not be as positive. I would not be as healthy. Uh, I would not be as optimistic as I am, even though in face of some problems that I'm faced with. So, and my purpose is dual. So I have a 14-year-old daughter who I just love as much as the other daughter that I had. I love my girls. And I want to help her mother to give her a good start into adult life. That means I have to earn a good living. Uh, that's a given. But one of the things that both her mother and I agree that it would be a great idea for her to something like you're doing, go go study abroad for a while. That opens your view of the world. It makes you it makes you into a smarter, better person because Americans are, unfortunately, a lot of Americans do not understand the rest of the world, and are just like uh, they look at their own navel all the time, right? It's like their worldview is much more narrow, and so it improves you as a person if you have you know that for sure. So, in the part of the second part of my purpose is I'd already told you that I love to be a teacher. I love to be a mentor, a consultant. So I'm working on a project that will hopefully help a lot of younger people, people younger than me, and that's a lot of them. You know, there could be even people my age, but generally people younger than men to find their way in life and not stumble around in the world as I have and wait like 70 years until they know who they are and live like a fulfilled life. And this project, I call it Spycology. It's a play on word. You understand what that means. And we're going to launch. I'm working with some people, young people who help me with the technology. We're going to launch a community. It's most likely the launch will happen in January, and that's going to happen on social media, so people can anybody you won't be able to to not see it. Okay, we'll do some significant marketing, and the whole idea is to collect a community of like-minded people. Mind you, is not for me to be a professor and everybody else listening. Like-minded people who will benefit from interacting with one another from from the challenges, from the successes, and from the failures. How to find their best way in life based on the individuals that they are. So I call this a superpower, which is collective wisdom. None of us can know as much as a bunch of people that will join me in that community, which I will facilitate and lead, but it's not me preaching. It's me just helping out and sharing some things that a lot of things that I learned in my life. But so, and if you have that many people interacting with one another, I think the outcome must become good. And we will also screen individuals. You know, you must be heart centered. You must be willing to serve others. You if you are an egomaniac like I was, and you don't see that this is not the way to be, you will be removed. It has to be like-minded individuals who want to help one another to live their best lives.
Yeah, so I think this is a great message for the end of our conversation. Thank you so much for your time and for doing this.
You're welcome.